Alright guys, finally we are here with the 100th episode of the My Hero Academia anime, and what a milestone it is. In fact, to celebrate, over on Twitter we are giving away one lucky fan's choice of any season of the anime on Blu-ray. So be sure to show some love and support over there at PlotArmorYT if you don't already do so. With that being said, despite this being the 100th episode of the anime, it was pretty chill and lax. Now there are of course a number of interesting tidbits to discuss, but coming off of the joint training battles, this episode had a bit of calm to it, although not entirely with the end part of it. But yeah, with the joint training battles now concluded, Deku would firstly commend Shinso on his improvement and his incredible battle prowess and know-how despite not yet being a part of the hero course. His capabilities with the same bindings as Eraserhead especially being impressive. And from there, it would then be definitively established that Shinso, with the next school year, would either be joining Class A or Class B, the final decision of which was not yet determined. But come on, why would he not be in Class 1A if he's using the same binding tapes as Eraserhead? This to me is just to keep that mystery and suspense going. But now fast forwarding a good bit, we would have a training session between Bakugo and Deku, wherein they were attempting to force the use of Deku's new quirk, Black Whip. However, doing so to no avail. And All Might, in abruptly concluding this exercise, would again come across as a very overprotective parent, shielding their child from any and all forms of danger. And as far as I'm concerned, if Deku really wanted to push his limits and use this quirk, he would have conveyed the sentiments of the prior wielder onto them, that anger can certainly be a catalyst for such power. But narratively, All Might is of course his mentor, and Bakugo these days is being a Boy Scout as much as he possibly can be with that loud mouth of his. And so to avoid taking a step backwards when it comes to his character progression, I imagine Horikoshi decided to opt out of doing so. More so attempting to highlight virtues such as being helpful or thoughtful in the case of Bakugo. However, after this, the three would sit down for a bit of tea and a conversation about this power. Now All Might would firstly address his lack of understanding and forewarning of such a dormant power, but Bakugo, more so cutting to the chase and being blunt, would be the one to drop the bombshell consideration that All Might himself was thinking of. That this power, from its origins and the possession of multiple quirks, perhaps isn't so different from All for One. A chilling consideration that certainly needed to be further looked into. But now, despite his prior sentiments and reservations, Deku does intend to use his quirk and has now come to consider it as a first step to many more. Moving on from there, we would make it back to the dorms, wherein Class 1A and Class 1B were all convening and having a good time together. And this was really nice to see. I love Class 1B and I want to see more of them in the story, so hopefully we get more of that. Now Deku would have a brief conversation with Shoto, as of course despite his prior explanation, there were still some questions to be had about this new power of his. And so Shoto, as someone who does possess a quirk that sort of acts as a 2-in-1, he of course couldn't help but question Deku, as considering their sports festival match, on the surface at least, he kinda comes across as a hypocrite, as he was kinda getting on Shoto for not embracing the entirety of his quirk. Which is a fair point given what he knows, but Deku would again express that he had no idea this was within him. But on that note, Shoto definitely does intend on becoming more powerful and more acquainted with his power, and to do so, he does need the aid of his father, who is more experienced in the fire aspect. And so finally, he himself would reach out. Now switching on over to the faculty members, again, the question of whether or not Shinso will be going to Class 1A and Class 1B is still on the table, but here they would be able to conclude it amongst themselves and not to us as the audience. But after this meeting, Eraserhead would be approached by President Mike, who would question why he is so interested in Shinso. Is it perhaps because he kind of reminds him of himself? Or, and he would become a bit more serious here and not as jokey, is it because of Shirakumo? A convention that Eraserhead would cut off and become a bit more reserved to. Now this tidbit here is something that the readers of the My Hero Academia Vigilante spin-off manga will definitely be able to resonate with. And even if you are not an avid reader of that manga, if you have ever seen our Eraserhead Origins video, then you have the full context of all of this. Now if you're an anime only, this information is not exactly necessary, but it does help to paint a clearer picture, and so I suggest you either check out that manga if you want more, or check out our video on it. But past that, and wow, this episode has a whole lot of scenes. Monoma would meet up with Eri and attempt to copy her quirk. But before that, Mirio apparently denoted Monoma to be the dark side of Yue to Eri, and I don't know why he would do that because it's not as if he's had plenty of interaction with Monoma. It's kind of an unbecoming thing to say from my perspective at least. But yeah, unfortunately Monoma was unable to copy Eri's quirk as it was a dud. The reason being that when Monoma copies someone's quirk, he copies the nature of it. And so, when it comes to quirks like Eri's or Deku's, he cannot take it, at least not really, not in its entirety, because what makes their quirks worthwhile is the power that they stockpile. He cannot make a copy of that stockpile. Now, the whole reason Eraserhead wanted to do this was to have a better time training Eri in how to properly use her quirk, but with this not being the case, they would unfortunately not be able to alleviate the difficulty threshold here. And because of this, Eri began to feel remorseful for her quirk. She felt bad for inconveniencing everyone around her. And this just goes to show how thoughtful of a character Eri is, but really and truly a child should not have to feel this way. And so rather than her solely looking at her quirk as a curse, Deku would go to her as someone who has struggled with the volatility of his own quirk and convey that it is also a blessing that saved him. Something that was thankfully able to provide a smile to her face once more. And again, considering Bakugo's prior sentiment that this quirk is not too different from that of All for One, in saying this aloud, Deku would be reminded of the very same thing and feel a degree of enrichment and reinvigorated enthusiasm when it comes to his own power. Now nearing the end of the episode, we would have Bakugo and Shoto finally receiving their provisional hero licenses. Again, despite being two of the fiercest combatants in their class and two characters that came out as number 1 and number 2 in the sports festival, they did need to take remedial classes to be able to procure this license of theirs. And funny enough, almost immediately after obtaining these, they would put them to good use by facing off against a group of villains. Now these villains were way over the top. They were flooding the streets just to steal a bunch of wallets. It seemed like a whole lot of extra just to do that, but whatever. Their leader was actually pretty cool looking and has the power to manipulate carbonation. Now the boys were able to make short work of this group and get rid of the riffraff almost immediately, but the leader of this entourage was certainly a cut above the rest with a pretty dangerous and unruly support item here. But even still, the boys managed to take him out pretty easily. Eventually, All Might would manage to bring another hero into the fray after everything was already done, Slide and Go. Now this is a hero that we have never seen before, and sure, maybe you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but as far as I'm concerned, there was no way that even if this guy did make it to the scene, he would not be able to take those guys out. No way, no how. Really and truly, with them flooding the street, Shoto's quirk was perfect for this, which to an extent you might equate to the convenience of plot armor. Plot armor so strong that even the weapons forged against you are intentionally made to be dull. And finally, with the after credits scene, there would be a bit of a celebration for these two to commemorate them getting their provisional licenses finally. And that was the episode. Not exactly the grandest thing, not exactly something that I would say thoroughly encapsulates and celebrates a 100th episode, but that just comes down to pacing and such. And with this coming from a manga, it's not as if Horikoshi decides, hey, this is going to be the 100th episode or anything of the sort. All in all, not a bad episode by any means, as it seemed to provide something for just about anyone. And with that being said, I want to ask you guys, what are some of your favorite moments of the My Hero Academia anime thus far? For me, off the top of my head, I would have to say Red Riot Unbreakable, Deku vs Muscular, and lastly, Uraraka vs Bakugo during the sports festival. All of which being fights, but admittedly, I don't think that My Hero Academia as an anime has the greatest fights in the world, seeing as they don't exactly measure up to many other anime on account of the simplistic power system and general lack of high-level martial arts choreography. And so more than the theatrics, more than the spectacle, it's more so the emotions associated with these scenes. You could go as far as to argue that instead of recognizing them as fights, these are all moments where Plus Ultra is applicable. And I just think it's a wonderful thing to go beyond what is perceived to be possible and exceed one's utmost limitations. But yeah guys, happy 100th episode, and hopefully you'll be willing to stick around for even more by subscribing to Plot Armor with notifications on, as we regularly cover this series to an extensive degree. And again, we love giving back to you guys as much as we can, so go ahead and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at PlotArmorYT so you don't miss a thing when it comes to the latest and greatest anime and manga news, memes and information, and giveaways like we are having today. Because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.